Hello guys, welcome back to puzzle solving number 2. I'm going to pick it up where we left it off last time. Because of my puzzles tend to get gradually harder, I believe that today we are going to look at a couple of trickier puzzles than beforehand. The first position actually is very similar to the first puzzle of the previous video of this team. But I believe that this one is going to have a different solution. White seems to have an overwhelming attack, and indeed we can already see the battery again here with the bishop and the queen. So we are looking at IDs with queen g8 check followed by knight f7 mate, but this one doesn't seem to be as good as in the previous video, because queen g8 is met by king takes, where we seem to lack a good enough discovered check that would lead to a forced mate. Many would be tempted to then take on d7 with the rook and pinch the queen, and this is a typical mistake that lots of amateurs make, that their focus is always on hunting down the enemy's queen rather than hunting down the king. The other important feature of the position is that the seemingly blunt and obvious rook takes d7 is actually really bad on account of queen takes back, and now we realize that the knight can't take the queen because of the back rank mate. And now we go back to our holy trinity. At last but not at least, we start the analysis with checks, captures, and then threats. This check has been dealt with. The other very tempting check appears to be knight g6. The idea with that is to open up the king so that we can give a check on the H file, and all of a sudden we realize that by doing that we just hit upon the correct idea, because by having the bishop on this diagonal we can actually afford the queen leaving that diagonal, as the bishop is still covering it, and we are delivering a beautiful checkmate. Once again, please note that every single move in the solution was checks all the way. All right, next. Whoa, that is a very famous oldie but goodie. What makes this puzzle a unique one is the fact that the final motif is a little bit unusual. So what we need to notice here is that the bishop is aiming down at h7, so a rook g4 start appears to be hugely likely, because by doing that we force the pawn to take, and then we start looking for active IDs to deliver a mate. We can't really then sacrifice the bishop on h7, because after king takes and rook up with the idea of rook here, we would realize that we can actually not do that, because when we played rook g1 the pawn took us, and therefore the fourth rank is blocked. So that doesn't work. But then again, we remember that puzzles very often exploit unguarded pieces, and one feature that stands out in this position is that this rook is here instead of the usual a8 square. And what it means is that the f8 rook can be potentially a target of attack after check and coming down here. And if we combine these two motives, then we soon realize that after rook g4, pawn takes check, king here, and then the threat, the first move that is not a check, but it is actually a threat mate in one threat, and not so much coincidentally but intentionally, we created a second mate threat on f8. Normally this setup with the queen here and the bishop on d3 would be perfectly inefficient to give a mate, because of various pawn moves or even capture of the bishop would stop the mate threat on h7. However, because of the rook is here and not back on a8, we have got the extra threat on f8, and the two different mate threats can't be parried, so Portish had to resign here. Righto, next. Goody. Very similar motifs. This time the bishop is already placed very actively on the d5 square, which means that the pawn on f7 is pinned. So essentially we can already pinch a free pawn on g6 for free, which seems to be the most likely first move, as we don't seem to have any reasonable checks. So the only question that remains is that what do we do if they take the rook, and how do we have mate? Obviously we continue our calculations with checks. So takes then h7 checks, the king has to retake. Now bishop e4 appears to be a very logical check. The king has to drop back to g8, and now we have a mate in 3 by bringing the queen check here, and then mate there. I'm trying to confuse you with the arrows as best as I can, but I think the explanation was clear. So let's see how it goes. Takes. I don't like you, dude, when you don't allow me to execute my moves. Takes there. Takes h7 check. Recapture is forced. Check. Only way to go back is to go to g8. And now the queen needs to be transferred here with checks so that we can finish off with this awesome mate. Job well done. Okie dokie. Next. Oh, poor Alekine. It was very rare that he got trashed like this. It was more typical that he won games in similar style. Basically, White's position is a total disaster because he's ridiculously weak on the white squares. Which I just made green for the sake of confusion. And of course, there is an uncontested white squared black bishop to make the confusion even worse. And there is no way that in this position we wouldn't have a tactical solution. In this case, the motif that seems to be screaming at us is the overloaded queen. This queen has got 25 million different tasks to fulfill. And there is no way that it can handle that many. So it's guarding f3, guarding e4, and preventing rook's penetration. But in fact, that's exactly how you exploit an overloaded piece. That you do one of the things that it's supposedly covering in order to decoy it. It has to take the rook, else the bishop on b2 is lost. And after that, it's a force made by taking the knight and then bishop h3. And mate on g2 is inevitable. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, it's quite cute. White has got this check with the idea of playing queen e4, stopping the mate. But instead of being greedy and taking it with the pawn, we can take it with the knight and thereby denying queen e4. So see, even to the last minute, you have to be alert. All right, next. All right, I'm assuming it's a white puzzle based on the look of it. Okay, I'm really confuzzled because the very obvious looking queen c3 seems to be deciding the game here. So yeah, queen c3, knight d4, take, and mate down on h8. That was lame. Oh, this is Yamo. Okay, so once again, we have got a beautiful attacking position. The black king is very exposed. The bishop is covering a lot of squares on this diagonal, which is likely that we need to do when we start off with queen d8 check. So my calculation goes as follows. Queen d8 check, king g7, rook takes. Bang. No mucking around, you go for the neck. Pawn takes back, and now instead of taking the pawn, I prefer h6 check to force the king further towards the edge where there are fewer squares available, and they in fact have to take it, and then queen h8 check is going to mate. Yippee! Problem solved. Check. Oh, come on. King here, rook takes, and check. And now you see how important it is that the bishop here is covering all those squares. The king has got no hiding spot. It must take. And queen h8 is an awesome mate. Next, rook can block and then it's mate. Ta-da! Done. Next. Let's trap the queen, shall we? But how exactly go about that one? Okay, so the two positional factors that stand out in this position are that the queen is ridiculously misplaced and could potentially be trapped, and the other one is the weakness of this diagonal. Goodness me. If you look at the position, all black pawns are on white, which obviously means that the dark squares are super weak. Also, black is a pawn to the good, so I suppose that the reason why his position is so ugly is because he was too busy pinching a pawn. So my first attempt to solve the puzzle would be to play bishop d4 with the intention of threatening with queen e5. I got that one right. And so black has to do something in order to stop that threat. And c5 seems to be sufficient. But then the trick is that now I'm going to trap the queen. So queen e5 was threatened, and after c5, now obviously queen e5 is not on because takes. I will drop the bishop back here. The queen goes here. I drop the bishop back. Now if they take rook e1, rook a1 wins the queen, and if the queen goes back here, then after a3, queen back, and bishop c3, we trap the lady. Please note that the c7 square is not available because of the queen is here. And please also note that queen e5 here, aiming to get the queen instead of... aiming to get the king by mating it instead of grabbing the queen would not work because of pawn d4. Which is actually not true that I'm looking at it. Because then I can just take that and it's pinned. So potentially queen e5 here would have been very strong too. The only move I can see against it is f6. Queen takes f6, and then queen e6 mate is threatened as well as check check, so that would be winning too. They chose the queen. I guess they both would have been perfectly fine. Alright, moving on. Let's call it last one. Oh yeah. This is a very, very nice example of why we need to consider all the aggressive moves before we settle for something that may not be that great. The black king is super duper exposed on h5, and one idea springs to mind immediately by pushing the king up and bringing the rook across to mate. And it seems like it is a totally winning concept and black can't do a single thing, but that's not the case. And this is also a good example to show that even in the most innocent looking scenarios, you need to look at material and material balance, because black of course has got the right to sacrifice material too. It's not only the attacker, but the defender can use that method too in order to eliminate the attack and in fact emerge even ahead. So now white has got an exchange extra, but two pawns are hanging. It's very, very unlikely that white has the slimmest hope for a win here. In fact, I would much rather be black here. So the point I'm trying to make is that you really have to be careful and count with the best moves for both sides, and I nicely just displayed the winning move. So the idea is that in order to prevent this very nice defensive concept of sacrificing the exchange back, we need to decoy that queen, and only then display this very clever king g2 move, and now indeed there is no way to stop the mate on h1. Very, very clever. And I think I'm going to stop here now. This was quite a few interesting motifs. I would probably suggest that you go through again to see if you got all of them right, and maybe you might want to listen to the analysis again, because I might have been a bit too fast. And I will be back with a few more videos soon. I have got a couple of new ideas that I haven't done on my previous channel either, so there will be a couple of new topics to look out for coming up soon on the channel. Thanks for tuning in, and please make sure you come back again. Cheers.